It's a new week. Week 3. Clean slate. Doesn't matter how good you've done up to this point. Everyone still has an equal chance of getting eliminated, in theory. But yeah. Danny Dimes. Believe it or not, the highest scoring player last week after starting off terribly, and I had lost all hope. But he saved me this week, but we'll get to that later. First off, gotta pay our respects to Kennedy. He's out of here. He's been chopped. Eliminated. Really, his team wasn't bad. It was just a bad week. I think as we get to these, charts that I've been using to kind of rank everybody, he was right around the middle of the pack, if not towards the top. So no one should feel safe ever. He's out of here. And yeah, that's about it. 17th place. He wasn't last. He wasn't 18th. So top 25% of the week. The elite of week 2. Big Fudge, Joey, coming in and taking that top spot kind of out of nowhere. He did not have a great week 1, but that's how this game goes. We also got Mark, James, and Ryan up here in the top 25%. I don't think any of those are too surprising. Top 25% had an average score of 129, which is up 26% from last week. So the top is very quickly rising. I think week 1 in the NFL, we saw some bad offenses. So definitely showed from a fantasy perspective as well. Now the bottom 25%, surprisingly, ended up being Mitchell at the very bottom. Not at the very bottom, but one up from the bottom, just barely surviving, you could say. He was not projected to be that low going into, I think, Sunday night and Monday night, but a lot changed over the course of those games, and having a doubleheader on Monday definitely adds a level of interestingness to the last day before people get eliminated. But average score of these bottom 25% was 89, which is up 29% from 69. So up a lot. The floor is going up. 89 is the average of the bottom 25%. It's kind of scary to think. I feel like that's where a lot of teams are projected this week. If I was looking at the projections, everyone's kind of in the 80s, 90s range. If you're over 100, you're probably pretty set. But you also had me, JC, and Cooper down here in the bottom 25%. So I've now been here twice, so I'm pretty familiar with the realm. Looking forward to tonight. Can Danny Dimes deliver against this 49ers defense? I don't think there's really many other stories to come out of this, except for that Barkley's not playing, so we'll see what the backfield looks like there. It seems like it should be Breda, but you also have Brightwell and Eric Gray might get involved. The Niners are heavily favored, minus 10.5. The over-under went down to 44 from 49 after Barkley was ruled out. I don't think I'm really putting any bets on this game, but I could see the Giants keeping it close. It shouldn't be as bad as that Cowboys game, but if you have the Niners defense, could be a good play. All right, how everyone's racking up this week. We got Ryan Kennedy getting chopped, obviously. And this is your total score on the year. So Basali at the top moves up from 3 to 1. He's just kind of sitting right around the top this whole time. We see Joey going from 13th to 2nd in the span of 1 week. I mean, it's early on, so this is going to be moving around a lot early on, and it'll start to even out as the year goes on. But you have me all the way at the bottom, dropping down below Cooper and Saunders. So not looking great for me. I'm only 3 points above the guy who just got eliminated on total scoring on the year, so that does not leave me feeling very safe. Especially going into today where I need Danny Dimes to come through for me. But anyway, a lot of movement except for Ben. Ben stays right at 7th. Pretty consistent there. Yeah, I don't think there's much else to say here. Let's move on to the economy. A lot of spending happened this week. We're already down to 1332 left in circulation. Basali's been making trades to gain a lot of money, so much so that he did spend some too this week, and he's still over 100. That'll probably work out great for him, and potentially could work out terribly for those who gave him lots of fab for his players. But a lot of people still not spending. James, Hugh, TVR, Cooper, Johnny, you could say, haven't spent at all or barely anything. I'm kind of in that group as well. I'm trying to make those budget moves to just marginally improve my team, but some people spending big. Jack was the biggest story this week. We'll get to it on his slide, but he's the guy who got Kelsey, and he also made a big trade to get Olave. So he's almost bankrupt at this point. He's basically saying, I like this team. I've traded for guys that are going to keep me safe, and he's going to hope they last him as long as possible. He really doesn't have much to work with unless he makes a trade to gain some fab back. But yeah, it's about the story of that. So a couple changes to these graphs. Last week, the three were your last week score versus your this week projection, your sleeper projection versus fantasy calcs projection, and then your position strength compared to how much budget you have to improve that position strength. I got rid of the first one, the previous versus next, because essentially if you had a bad previous week, there's no way you can be in the green because you'd automatically be on the left side of this chart. So there's no point in looking at what last week is. It's all about moving forward. So I've changed that one to this week compared to your rest of season rank, and I've also switched away from Fantasy Calc to Fantasy Pros, which is a little bit more well-renowned for, their analytics. So I think it's a better platform for me to use. They have some free things I'm able to use without paying, so I'm going to use them. So we've switched from Fantasy Calc to Fantasy Pros, and this is your next week rating versus your rest of season rating, and this is based on your current roster. This does not look at fab or anything like that. It's just your players and their matchups this week versus their schedules for the rest of the year and how Fantasy Pros likes them. So in the green, we've got Jack. Obviously, he's going to be in the green a lot this week because he's got Kelsey, he's got Olave, and he already had a decent team. So he is skewing this way up to the right. JC, Joey, and Basali also looking good for this week. Teams that look good this week but maybe don't have a good outlook for the rest of the season, you got Ben, Mitchell, and Jake. And then alternatively, a little iffy this week but has a good projection for the rest of the year, you got TVR. I think that's looking at Jonathan Taylor, saying he's got a good rest of season with Jonathan Taylor, but obviously he doesn't have him this week. And Potter as well is in this category. And then in a lot of us down here in the bottom left that you're not looking good this week, and you're not looking good for the rest of the season, at least from your current players' standpoint. All right, this one we've seen before. This is just comparing Fantasy Pros versus Sleeper and your projection for this week. They seem to agree. There's no one in the yellow here. It's like Fantasy Pros and Sleeper either likes you or they don't. I know there's a couple floating around here in the middle, Mitchell and TVR, but everyone is in a green or a red here, which I find kind of interesting. Obviously, you're still going to see Jack way up here, and JC, Joey, Basali. I believe Basali was that. Yeah, those are the four from on the green on the last one. But now you're seeing some people in the green here, Ben, Jake, Mitchell, that look good this week according to the analytics. But then plenty of people not looking so good. James Saunders, TVR, probably okay. It's this bunch down here, me, Cooper, Johnny, Potter, Ryan, Hugh, that are not looking so good this week. And, rest of season doesn't really matter if you don't make it past this week. So this week is arguably just as important as what your future looks like. And now this is the same chart, except now the position strength is based on what Fantasy Pros thinks your position strength is. You have James and TVR, the only two in the green here, which they were not in the green in either of the others, I don't believe. So that is interesting to see. This means they have a lot of budget, and they have strong positional groups. I think James is only lacking at running back. Everywhere else is very strong. And then TVR with Jonathan Taylor, I think that puts them in like the top three for the running back groups compared to all the other teams. So they get the nod for the green here. Lots of people that have lots of budget but do not have strong position groups right now. And then only a couple people, and this is kind of the obvious few, that have spent a lot this week. Jack, JC, and Joey. I believe all three of these have spent a significant amount. So this is saying they have strong players right now, but they don't have a lot of budget to improve it much farther, especially Jack, who has the strongest positions but has the least budget. So we'll see how this strat works out for him. I think he's safe for many, many weeks, barring any injuries or any other ridiculous things happening. But, late in the season, I think he might regret spending that much, but we will see. And then you have Ben, Potter, and Mitchell in the bottom left here, meaning they are lower on the budget, and the analytics does not love their positional strength. But you don't have to agree with that. I don't think these three teams, in my opinion, are at big risk of getting eliminated this week. But we'll get into that. I've also changed this. I know I've changed a lot week over week. I didn't love how it felt last week. I've still given you your score. You get 1 point per green, half a point per yellow, and 0 points per red. But I don't think it's as cut and dry as your sum of that is how good your team is. So top right, I have the solid overalls, and this is a little bit opinionated of me. I'm not, like I said, just basing it off the number. Like you see, I put James up here, and he only has 1. My argument for James, I'll start there. I mean, first off, he has strong players, and he has a high budget. I think that's a great recipe for success long term. And short term, if you already have strong players. And then he's in the red in these other two, but barely. Like, he's barely in the red for Sleeper versus Fantasy Pros projection. He's well above the bottom 25% here, and he's also pretty close to the middle here. So while he only does get 1 point, I think his team is very strong and shouldn't get eliminated this week. And if he's smart with his money, shouldn't get eliminated for a couple weeks at least. And then JC and Basali also, they've been good with their money so far, and they have strong teams as it is. Basali's been trading away players. He has acquired some, but he's mostly traded away players to get Fab, and his team is still good. So that's always kind of scary. And the surprise, you might say, is me putting Jack over here in the left, the box for the good in short term, questionable long term, and that's obviously just because he has 3 Fab. So he's going to be very good for the next 5 weeks or so, but after that, it's going to start getting more questionable. Other teams are going to start becoming just as strong as his, and he's not going to have money to keep up with other teams continually improving. It's the only reason I put him here. We also have Joey, Ben, Jake, and Mitchell. I think they have teams that are good now. These are usually teams, I'm pretty sure all these have made acquisitions this week that have improved their team, but they might not have as much Fab going forward to improve it further. Bottom right, kind of the opposite. I think you're not looking good in the short term. You could get eliminated this week, but you do have a promising long term, whether that means you're holding on to injured players that are going to come back, like the Jonathan Taylor, or you have a lot of Fab to spend and your team is already okay, but towards the bottom. We got TVR, Johnny, Potter, and Hugh. And if I think you're bad kind of everywhere, not just what I think, but kind of what the numbers say, I have you down here in the danger zone. That's Ryan, Cooper, Saunders, and myself. I think we have players that probably have some bad matchups this week. We're not projected very high. Might not have a lot of money either. I mean, you can make an argument for any of these 4 that you could be over here where you're promising in the long term because you have money. I know Ryan and I have money. I think all 4 of us here have a decent amount of Fab still left to spend, but it's just we are very, very low on our projected scores this week, so it's not a good place to be. Okay. Some general week 2 takeaways, kind of basing it off of what I talked about last week with tight ends. Kelsey and Andrews were out, but they returned this week. But the tight end position proved to be very volatile at least early in the season. You have kind of your distribution of scores here. Hawkinson being this one tight end who scored 22 plus. Everyone else falling in this 0 to 16 range, centering around this 4 to 6. Tight ends are only averaging 7.8 points last week with a standard deviation of 5. So that is an extremely high variability from this data set for week 2. So you can get as low as 2 from your tight end and as high as 13, and that's your realm of expectation, so to speak. But tight ends off to a slow start, I'd say, besides Hawkinson. But one of the big ones to keep an eye on is Hunter Henry, who I wish I spent on him after week 1 because no one drafted him. But he is right now the tight end 2 behind Hawkinson, looking pretty solid on the Patriots offense. The other thing to follow up is on defenses. Last week, defenses just carried the way for a lot of people. This week, only one team's top scorer was a defense, and that was the Steelers for TVR. Last week, we saw 2 defenses as a team's top scorer. This week, only 18% of the league had a defense in their top 3 scorers. Last week, it was 40%. 7 of the 18. This week, it was 3 of the 17, I believe, if that math checks out. So big drop off there, but defenses were still pretty good with an average of 9 points compared to the average of 10 points last week. So I still think a defense is very important. If you can get a solid 8, 9, 10, right around that range points for your defense from your defense, and you can kind of count on it, then that's huge. Because as we've seen, some of our flex plays, some of our even like projected to be good plays can only get you like 5 points or less sometimes, and I don't know. I think the defense is underappreciated. Also, on that note, the reason I wanted to switch to Fantasy Pros as well is because Fantasy Calc did not take into account the defense in your position group, and I think it's a very important position group to look at in terms of your team's strength. So all of your position group rankings in this previous view here includes defenses now and flex as its own category. Okay. Can't forget, keep looking into this every week. Ben versus Jake. Ben takes the cake this week, scores 108 for a weekly rank of 6, and Jake only scores 95 for a weekly rank of 11. Neither of these teams were extremely strong or extremely weak, but Ben does take the head-to-head matchup here. Just a little chart for each team here in terms of what Fantasy Pros thinks your positional strength is. This is saying Ben's got really strong running back and defense. He acquired the Cowboys defense this week. So obviously have been the strongest defense year to date. And his running backs are strong as well. A little weak at the flex, but that's about it. For Jake, has him very strong at quarterback. Of course, he drafted Mahomes. Strong at defense as well. I forget what defense he has, but it's a good one. Tight end, solid. Just a little weak at wide receiver. Both these teams are a little weak at wide receiver, you could say. But Jake does have the edge on the running total of points at 200 compared to Ben's 195, but the head-to-head is 1-1 through 2 weeks. All right, team by team. Starting with this week's rankings, Joey came in at the top with 150 points. Big week from Kirk Cousins. He is the QB1, fantasy QB1 through 2 weeks, which is pretty awesome to see. I liked him going into the season, but QB1 is obviously exceeding expectations so far. Big breakout week from Swift. I know that was without Gainwell in the mix, and Gainwell might be back, but I think Swift could be a stud. It'd be hard to see the Eagles not keep running him after how well he just played. But yeah, we'll see how that plays out. Mostert, who he acquired through a trade last week, worked out pretty well from him. On these slides, I'm going to kind of color code the players. If they're kind of this blue, then that's someone you acquired through a trade, and if it's this gold, you acquired them through free agency. So on that note, he acquired Pittman this week, and you can see Pittman plugs in right as wide receiver 2. This week, these are some new charts I've added in. I've gotten rid of the draft. I don't think the draft is that important anymore because most teams are very different from how they've drafted so far with how much you guys are trading, which I think is awesome how much you guys are trading. It's just hard to keep track sometimes. But Joey spent a lot on Pittman, I should say. $30 for Pittman is kind of a lot, but I guess it does secure him, and he's looked good so far. And if Anthony Richardson keeps being as good as he's looked and only gets better, then could it mean good things for Pittman as well. But, yeah, this is his team. You got Kirk Cousins, Pollard, Mostert, Cooper, Pittman, Mark Andrews, DeAndre Swift, and Marquise Brown in the flexes, and then the Eagles defense. This is just a solid team all around. I guess not loving Amari Cooper as his wide receiver 1, but I'd say he's got a strong team across the board here. And you can also see the positional strength on this kind of web chart. Has him low at wide receiver, but pretty strong everywhere else. Basali, the reigning leader of total points for, scored 134 last week, came in second. Another big week from Mike Evans. Kyron Williams has worked out fantastically for him. That was a free agent claim last week. Rashad White, another good week, but he traded him away. We'll get into that. But pretty solid lineup across the board. Not loving the Titans' defense, but they do play the Browns this week. I think this is disrespectful to Hunter Henry to have him at 11th on the tight end. I mean, I know it's been 2 weeks, but Hunter Henry's looking like a stud. Really, really, really strong at wide receiver, and he added Metcalf and Shaheed. So Diggs, Metcalf, Mike Evans, and Shaheed. That's just a solid group right there. I think Shaheed is on the rise. He spent 18 on Metcalf, 2 on Shaheed. And then he got Jacobs and A-Chain in a trade as well. So I think this is just a solid-looking team. Jacobs and Kyron Williams should be pretty solid for him. And then the four wide receivers and Hunter Henry. I don't think it matters if Justin Fields was kind of having a slow year so far, and the Titans' defense is kind of whatever. I think he's looking good, especially having 124 fab in the bank. He's looking good. Two flames for Basali. And I guess I'll point out Joey gets the star. He had nothing going into this week. He's got a star now. And Basali's team's looking hot through 2 weeks. Okay, James comes in third. Led the way by Lamar and Puka. Puka is going to probably go down as the biggest steal of the draft, I would say. I mean, I think he got him in the last round, which is just insane. And that is why, if you do that, then you don't have to spend fab. And that's why James is sitting at 100. He just, he was at 92, but he got 8 fab back from trading away the Cowboys defense for the 49ers. Potentially a questionable move, but the 49ers have a good defense too, so hard to argue with it. He got fab from it as well. But he has made really no major moves anywhere except for last week at running back, where you got Dylan and Zeke to fill in. But now he has Dylan and, oh boy, you're going to test my knowledge on people's faces. Oh, this is Tyjae Spears. Okay. I have him up on another tabs to reference in case I forget. Tyjae Spears, and then he's also got Jahan Dotson and Jaden Reed in his flexes. His receivers, CD and Puka, Darren Waller in the flex. These are all pretty solid plays here. I have James in the looking good, like very solid all around because he has 100 fab. His team's solid except for running backs, but that's easy to address and arguably not that important. If they can get him just 4, 5, 6 points or whatever, the rest of his team is solid. Gets the flame as well. Ryan, hot and cold. Cold week 1, hot this week. T. Higgins bounces back for him, gets him 25. Ryan moved on from Burrow, and potentially wisely so because of this nagging calf injury. We'll see if he even plays this week. But Jared Goff turning into a stud. I mean, he ended last year really strong, and I thought he was a great pick for this year as well. Lockett with a really solid week as well. If you can see by the positional chart, Ryan is not like super dominant anywhere. No greens here. Lockett is his best positional, guy at wide receiver 2, a strong wide receiver 2. Ryan goes and gets Algier and Waddle and Thielen and Atwell this week via trade and acquires the Jaguars defense on the waivers for $1. Decent team across the board. Josh Kelly, this could very easily be Eckler if Eckler plays, but on that note, Ryan's got a kind of an injury bug on his team right now with David Montgomery questionable, as well as Eckler, as well as, let's see who else is there on Ryan's team. I know it's looking kind of bad. Waddle's questionable with a concussion, I believe, so that's why Ryan, and I just made this trade for Atwell right before I started recording this because Ryan just wanted some extra security in case some of these guys don't play, but still has a decent amount of fab to work with 91. But this week, Ryan is in that danger zone, I think, for getting eliminated based on injuries and matchups. But we will see. He could go right back down to the ice cube this week, but we'll see how it pans out. Now Jack, as we know, spent big this week. He's kind of put together this powerhouse of a team compared to everyone else right now. Getting Kelsey, getting Deshaun Watson. I think that was an upgrade from who he had. I forget who it was. It was Geno Smith, who he actually subsequently dropped after being his highest scorer this week, which I find kind of funny. But hey, do what you got to do. Pickens and Moss with the big weeks as well. Also gets Aaron Jones in a trade and Chris Olave. Just every position is pretty strong here. I don't think Moss is in his starting lineup this week, and maybe that's not accurate. I put all these graphics in yesterday, so Wednesday, later in the day, so I know these can change between now and Sunday, or even now between then and today when I'm recording this, but looks like he's got Mixon and Aaron Jones in there, and he's starting Amon-Ra, Olave, Pickens, and then Ingram in his second flex. Might be one of the only guys starting 2 tight ends, but when you have Ingram and Kelsey, then it's kind of warranted. So, yeah, Ravens defense as well. So as we said, he's a solid team, very strong, not just solid, very, very strong team here, but has almost no fab left to work with, so we'll see how that pans out for him in the long run. Basically a lock to be safe for 3 weeks, if you ask me. All right, moving on to Ben. Came in 6th this week, 7th last week. He's been very consistently around that top middle of the pack, but not quite earned any top 25% accolades yet. Big week from Nico Collins. That's turned out to be a great late round pick for him. McCaffrey obviously doing his work, and Kenneth Walker as well, panning out well for him, has him as one of the strongest running back groups in the league. The number 1 RB1 and the number 1 RB2, so that is always good. He acquired Justice Hill, Mims, Burks through free agency for pretty cheap. Justice Hill could be pretty good. I see he's starting him in the flex, and he's got Burks in the flex as well. He traded for T and moved on from Waddle. Got some fab for that as well, and then he traded away the 49ers defense to get the Cowboys, which should be an absolutely great move if you ask me. The Cowboys defense has looked that good that they're worth trading fab for. The only thing I'd say is that generally his wide receivers are a little iffy. I mean, I know Nico Collins is at a hot start. It's hard to say he'll continue at that rate, but and then T. Higgins is his wide receiver 1 with a somewhat impaired Burrow. Could be a little questionable. And so far, Kyle Pitts is still just not living up to anything, and that's unfortunate because he's a freak athlete, but he's just not getting used in that Falcons offense. I don't know why. But yeah, 79 left in the bank. That's around the bottom-ish of the pack, but still plenty to work with, I'd say. Saunders goes from the bottom of the barrel to 7th this week. Pretty solid turnaround. We saw bounce-back weeks from Drake London. He acquired Terry McLaurin, who got him some points. This is where I need to pull the faces back up because I don't know everyone's face. This is Brian Robinson. Yeah, great week from Brian Robinson. His glaring weakness is at quarterback, I'd say, with Derek Carr. Derek Carr should be solid, but he just hasn't been this year so far. But we'll see if that changes. Has him ranked as the last at starting quarterback, according to Fantasy Pros. But he's sticking with his guys this week. He really acquired no one except for Mac Jones, who could just be a safety net for Derek Carr. Maybe he'll start Mac Jones. Who knows? Mac Jones has been good through 2 weeks. Still has 84 left in the bank. Should mention, I do have this team as I believe in the danger zone. A team to keep an eye on. Hugh, decent week again, staying right around the middle of the pack. Big week from Saquon, but now there is no more Saquon going for, well, at least for this week. Christian Kirk and Ramondre putting up good weeks for him as well. Just make some budget acquisitions in Latavius Murray and Ty Chandler. Now Cam Akers is in the Vikings backfield, so Ty Chandler really might not be worth anything, but he didn't spend any money, so no harm there. His second flex, this is Mingo, I've confirmed just now. So pretty weak at flex with Elijah Moore and Mingo. But Tua's solid. He's got some decent-ish running backs with Ramondre Stevenson and Gus Edwards, but the analytics are really not loving this guy's wide receivers. I don't think they're as bad as this is saying, but I guess that's what the analytics say. But he's definitely playing the long game here. He's not making any big moves and just kind of sticking with who he's drafted and saving that budget for later in the season. But, it's all for nothing if you get eliminated, so we will see how that works out. All right, TVR's team. He was right there at the bottom between him and Kennedy getting eliminated going into Monday. And because the Steelers defense came up with 2 defensive touchdowns, just a huge week, pulled him out of dead last or second to last into right around the middle of the pack. I mean, that's how much one player can change your outlook if they're going to score 29 points. But then Justin Herbert and Bijan Robinson having good weeks as they should. Jerome Ford now going right into a starting lineup could be good. I mean, that's the one he drafted, so that ended up being a great draft pick. But we'll see if Kareem Hunt doesn't pull away from Jerome Ford in terms of getting touches in the backfield, or just getting snaps in general. The only weak part of this guy's team is at wide receiver. Romeo Doubs is wide receiver 2, Godwin number 1, and then Kadarius Toney as a second flex. I mean, none of those are that scary. They're kind of, I'd say, a little weak, but he does have a promising future with 100 fab and Jonathan Taylor eventually coming back. And the other thing to point out is Kittle. The analytics likes Kittle, and obviously I like Kittle too, but they're just, so far this year he's been a disappointment. So we'll see if he can get that turned around. No major acquisitions this week or this season at all, really. All right, Johnny drops off a little bit this week, but he does have one of the strongest top 2 wide receivers in the league. I wouldn't say wide receiver core. I'd probably give that to Mark. But at the 1 and 2 spot, he has the best wide receiver 1 and the best wide receiver 2, according to the analytics. So hard to argue with that. This chart is pretty funny. Just shows how strong he is at wide receiver and weak he is everywhere else. Has Jordan Love. Got him for 0, which is pretty good. A safety net for if Anthony Richardson misses any time, but it's just a concussion, so I think he might be able to play this week. I think I don't love how these are being ranked how he's being ranked at flex. He's got JSN and Tank Dell. Tank Dell's been a stud for being a rookie and being a late round pick so far this season, and JSN I think is just on the verge of breaking out. I think. He was a stud in college. I don't think he's going to be bad in the NFL. It's just taking him time to get up to speed, I think. Komet at tight end is all right. Don't love it. Antonio Gibson and Madison at running back I don't love either, but hey, that's why I think his wide receivers will carry him to safety, at least for now. Still 99 fab left. Okay. Jake's team fell off from 1st to 11th this week. Mahomes leading the way. Hockenson with a great week. Mike Williams also helping him out. But not a lot after that, at least last week. But he has made some acquisitions. Probably one of the most active players in trading this week. Acquiring Rashad White for 23. He acquired Addison, Zach Moss. That's why the other guy didn't start, Zach Moss, because he traded him away. See, it's hard to keep track of all this, okay? Roshan Johnson and Josh Reynolds, all pieces that could be startable this week, arguably. And I'm seeing Zach Moss starting. I'm seeing Rashad White, so he brought 2 brand new running backs to start for him this week. Addison, he's starting. Reynolds, he is not, at least at the time that I took the screenshot. And then Roshan Johnson Roshan Johnson here in the flex with Khalil Herbert, which I find kind of interesting. Both Bears running backs. I'll be curious to see if he keeps it that way and starts both of them, but I think you kind of got to pick one and go with it. Unless, you think it's safe to start them both, then fair enough. I guess the Chiefs have a good matchup this week. I don't actually know who they play, but the analytics likes it. Pretty solid team. 87 fab, still left to spend. I thought 23 was a huge overpay for Rashad White, but he got some back in these other trades. So I guess in the grand scheme of things, not terrible. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see how he does. Potter's team. Big week from James Cook. Also Joe Burrow and Sky Moore, 2 people he acquired via trade last week. So trading for players worked out for Potter last week. Has very strong at wide receiver with Tyreek Hill, DJ Moore, and Jerry Jeudy. And Sky Moore might have just had a dud week 1, and maybe he's going to be great. People had high expectations for Sky Moore this year, so at the second flex, it's not a bad move. Joe Burrow, hopefully he plays this week. We'll hope. I think Jake Ferguson is a solid-ish tight end. Analytics don't love him. I think the only place where Potter's team is pretty weak is at running back, but he acquired Kamara as a future guy, which is just one more week. Just one more week without Kamara. He's back week 4. So if Potter can survive this week, he's got Kamara coming back, and that'll be really good for his starting lineup. Lions defense as well for a $1. Maybe it was strong he got for $1. Analytics doesn't love it, but I don't mind the Lions defense. All right, moving on to Cooper's team. He acquired nobody this week. Had a big week from Keenan Allen and Josh Allen and Gabe Davis. He's got the Josh Allen, Gabe Davis stack, which worked out for him last week. It's high risk, high reward having a stack, so we'll see how that plays out for him this week. Not super strong at running back, I wouldn't say. Derrick Henry's good, but Dalvin Cook at the 2 is not great. This might be the worst flex team in the league, and I'm not, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just saying how it is and what I think. I think these are guys that can put up 0. They can both put up 0, Jalen Hyatt and Terrace Marshall. I think I saw he had put in Marvin Jones for one of these guys. I forget which one, but Marvin Jones is also a guy that can get you 0. So yeah, I think he is heavily reliant on how his flexes turn out. I think the rest of his team is pretty solid, but if he gets some duds from his flexes, then he could be at risk of getting eliminated this week, in my opinion. But if he makes it past it, he's got money to improve his team. Still 100. He hasn't made any acquisitions this past week. 2 ice cubes now. Moving on to JC. JC's team, I think, is one of the teams that has a pretty good outlook for the future, but had a pretty tough week this week. Jalen Hurts definitely helped him, filling in for Aaron Rodgers last week. Jalen Hurts should be a starter for the foreseeable future. Didn't spend much this week. Just got Everett for $1. He already has Kincaid, so I think that's just a safety net. I think Everett's fine. But ETN and Javonte Williams are pretty decent at running back. Jamar's having a slow start to the season, kind of along with everyone on the Bengals, so that could probably improve. Debo's pretty good at his wide receiver 2, and then Zay Flowers and Jacoby Myers are decent flex plays, and the analytics seem to agree with that. Here's another team last week that had a defense in their top 3 scorer. Wasn't a lot, but 11 is nothing to scoff at. But yeah, generally I think Jalen Hurts was worth the money that he spent last week. I think it was 26 or something like that. That math would make sense. 73 left after spending 1 this week. I think this team's pretty solid top to bottom. I think this is one of the teams I'd say is safe for at least this week, I would say. Now moving on to my team. This is a team I'm very not confident in, and I don't think I'm just being hard on myself. I think my team is bad. Very concerning, as I would say. I acquired Matt Breida and Kareem Hunt this week for $6 total, so I'm okay with that. I like that I got guys like that for cheap. Breida is a risk because I think he's not that great when he gets his opportunities to start, and I think we might see some other running backs in the Giants' backfield getting work in tonight, so it's still TBD on if I start him. But he's a guy. If he works out, he works out. If not, not too much money lost. Danny Dimes came in huge for me last week. I had lost hope through like the first, second quarter, and then he turned it around. That rushing upside is really showing its promise, and it's kind of why I drafted him. James Conner being solid. He plays the Cowboys this week, so that's a terrible matchup. Garrett Wilson is questionable, but I think he's fine, but just he's not in a good situation without Aaron Rodgers throwing him to him anymore. I think he did get 1,000 yards with Zach Wilson before, so it's not that he can't do it again. I'm not very confident in it, and a bad week from A.J. Brown last week just gave me problems. He should be one of my better players. Yeah, not great across the board. I'm finally giving Jaylen Warren a start, and I think he's earned it. I think Najee's fallen off, and so Jaylen Warren is the only player on my team I'm very optimistic about. I guess Hunt you could say I'm optimistic about, potentially taking over that Browns backfield, but I think it's a risk starting him right away, so I still have to make that decision on if I'm going to do that. I think it's right now is Tutu Atwell on my flex. That is no longer the case. It's going to be someone else like Breida or Hunt or someone else on my bench. But I have to make that decision here kind of soon. But yeah, still a lot left to spend, so if I can survive, I'm prepared to start improving my team sometime soon, hopefully. But yeah, not a good week. Not a good start to the season. 2 ice cubes. All right, Mitchell went from hot to cold. Very cold this week. His team's pretty solid. I mean, he acquired Gibbs. That strengthened up the running back room, especially with David Montgomery potentially not playing. Should be more work for Gibbs, or maybe Craig Reynolds will get worked in. But Devonta Smith came in huge from last week, and that was about it. The Dolphins' defense with 10 points was his second best score, and Lawrence only got him 9. You shouldn't see that too often, so I think he's, and the analytics agrees, no one in the red here. He's got a pretty solid enough team, and that's all you need. All you need is solid enough to not get eliminated in the next week. Michael Thomas and Sutton in the flexes are pretty solid, with Ayuk and Devonta Smith in the starting spots. Laporta's looking good so far early into his rookie year. You could argue 36 is an overpay for Gibbs, but when you need it, when Chubb goes down and you need a replacement, you could argue it's worth it. Just not too much left to spend for the rest of the year at 57. I think that's second to last, just above Jack with 3, but 57 still enough to work with, I'd say. But I think Mitchell's looking pretty solid this week. And one last look at Kennedy's team. No one really performed too strongly for him last week, and that's hence why he got eliminated. Deshaun Watson with only 13, and that was his highest score. Kelsey just did not do enough. 11 is good for a tight end, but for Kelsey, I think you can argue you're a little disappointed in that performance. A lot of these guys are good players, and they went to the waivers, and people scooped them up, but altogether was not enough to keep Kennedy alive. 75 points. But I think what this does tell you is that Travis Kelce does not make you bulletproof in a league like this, even when he does perform decent. I'd say 11 is decent. So I know Jack acquired him for 51, and I'd say Jack's team is very, very, very strong, and that's not just because of Kelce. But Kelce does not make you bulletproof, I think is what we've learned early in the year. I thought Kelce would have made someone be safe for 5 weeks, is what I would say, but until the rest of the team start getting more strong. But that was not the case. But generally, I'd say for this team, the other thing was that the running backs just were not strong enough. Gibbs was his only real guy there. I think he had P. Ryan starting at the 2. Just wasn't enough to get it done. And he is now gone, eliminated. And one more thing I wanted to go back and say about this, where I've put everyone based on their, where they rank up on these graphs. I think these bottom 2, well, this one is, I think, you're bad now and you don't have a good outlook, and here you're bad now but you do have a good outlook. I mean, I think if I had to take a guess, I would say one of these 8 is getting eliminated this week, and that these 8 up here are probably safe. And going forward, I think I'm going to keep this format of these 4 different categories as opposed to just good, bad, and unknown, because that's just kind of vague and unhelpful. I think if you're good in the short term or good in the short term and long term, obviously I think you're good now, barring anything crazy happening. So my bet is on one of these 8 teams: Ryan, Cooper, Saunders, me, TVR, Johnny, Potter, Hugh. We'll see if I'm right. I kind of want this to be somewhat predictive as opposed to random, because so far the 2 teams that have gotten eliminated each week have been in the yellow. No red team has gotten eliminated yet through 2 weeks, so maybe that's good news for me, but now this is a different format, so it could change. But yeah, that is all I have to say. Good luck, everyone. Don't get eliminated this week.